Hi and good afternoon, everybody. It's really great to be here after a year of a break since UX 2015. It's fantastic to see that a gathering of such a fantastic community can become even better after just one year. In 2015, I was sharing with you some tips and tricks on how to conduct different types of research in a big organization. I told you about my experience when working with TAURON, the Polish energy company, and I tried to share some knowledge about how to conduct the bottom research with those people actually working down there in the organization and what kind of insight we can get. I'm happy to report that the project is done, project is finished, but it doesn't mean that the story of TAURON is finished. Today I'm not going to talk about TAURON, just TAURON, because just after finishing the project, as always, we tried to do some kind of follow-up, to think about what worked and what didn't work in our project. We also went a step further and we wanted to ask our community on their experiences when working with that sort of big 30,000 employee organization. We wanted to have a glimpse on what it is to be a UX practitioner working for a corporate client. And the results, to be honest, were grim. What we heard most of the cases was that we are afraid of those highest paid persons' opinions destroying our visions. We are afraid of design being conducted by committees of people who are not really reliable sources of that kind of information. We were afraid of working in organizations in which several departments work in complete isolation, which do not communicate at all with each other. We were afraid of old technologies, legacy systems that hindered our design processes. We were afraid of those long meetings that lead to nothing, basically. As I said, well, the image is grim. But the natural response, of course, is how can we fix it? What's the way to make this cooperation with those big entities a bit better? The natural thing I do is, well, let's look for some analogy. Let's look for something that may help me and you to come up with solutions. And amazingly, those surprises are the best sources of inspiration. Came to me just yesterday when I was watching quite an interesting talk about the future of education system. The thesis that I suppose most of us will agree with is that the classical model of education developed purely for the industrial age is not efficient anymore. It's not as efficient in 2016 as it was in maybe 1916. Some things have to change so that we can prepare our kids to work in our modern world a bit better. And immediately this analogy appeared that maybe also us as UX community, UX practitioners, maybe we have to change the way we think about our systems. Until now, we work, or most of us work, as people creating certain objects, deliverables, be it a wireframe, be it an app, a service, a product. Exactly the same as the traditional education system tries to just, well, push certain knowledge to the student, to the pupil, without really giving him the tools so that he himself can teach himself on how to live, how to gain knowledge. That change that is proposed in education systems around the world can be applied to our world. We can stop being just producers of certain objects. We can become teachers of certain kind of mindset. We can start teaching our clients, people who use our services and our knowledge, for them to use those skills, this knowledge, by themselves. My most vivid memory of primary school is my physics teacher, an elderly guy wearing just black and in between shouting at us, reading notes from his very famous textbook or notebook, a notebook that looked like an original Declaration of Independence, yellow with scribbles, pages torn, etc. This is the perfect image of a traditional way of teaching nowadays. We are, or teachers, most of the teachers are those textbook teachers, trying to use just one method of teaching and to try to make it fit to all the situation. People who do not look at different students, different people's, their individual needs, and we all have individual needs. People who just use one single method for every single situation. Exactly the same as some of us may sometimes use the same methods, the same approach, the same tools when working with many different clients from different sectors with different interests. In here, I would like to, well, to some extent honor TAURON as the project is finished and start with this example from the very beginning of our cooperation with TAURON. As you may know, in most of the situations when you want to start cooperation with that kind of company, you have to collect a quite impressive amount of documents for the contest or tender, describing the budget, describing the schedule, describing team competences, tools, etc., etc. Documentation that is boring to be prepared, but still, well, mandatory. At this point, when we started, we thought, well, is this really what TAURON wants from us? Can we go a step further? Can we think about cooperation with this company more individually? We came up with a very simple solution. We didn't really take much of our time or resources. We asked ourselves, what is the thing that the project manager or product owner at TAURON would like to see every day in her or his office that would somehow describe the whole idea behind the whole project? Along with the huge binder of documents, we sent that kind of inconspicuous package. That was before the time that corporations sort their mail and just destroy everything that doesn't fit certain standards. They received that kind of tube, inside of which they could find a huge poster that we prepared, describing the whole design, research, implementation, and again, research process within this project. We graphically described future 3 years of working with TAURON. It's not something complicated, it's not something really sophisticated, but what we achieved was, apart from the fact that this poster was hanging inside of TAURON's offices for 2 years, we gave people working at TAURON a visual timeline on what we are gonna do. Just like when we learn languages at school, we have, for instance, different levels of language knowledge, A1, A2, B1, B2, etc. By tracking our progress, we can see the progress of the whole project. Is it, be it my learning of a language or the project at TAURON? The result was that we asked ourselves some very simple questions. By being curious, we asked certain simple questions and came to a very simple solution that, which I'm very glad to remind myself, was one of the key things that made us cooperate with TAURON among many different companies. Let's admit that all of us like when somebody is curious about us. We like when we are being asked questions about what we do, how we do it, what our day looks like. The same applies when cooperating with even the biggest cooperation organization. If we, with unique curiosity, approach those people and curiously ask them even the basic questions about what they do, we will not only gain knowledge that enables us to work, basically, but we also establish some kind of rapport, some kind of link with those people. And without knowledge on one hand and understanding your client or having this link with your client, any UX project, well, is deemed to be a failure, unfortunately. Similarly, we can look at our work as a kind of story. We don't have to present our work just in terms of schedule, budget, etc. We can think about it as a story, and we can try to tell this story to our client. We, of course, can use sprints, agile sprints, we can use specifications, etc., but why don't we use a very simpler tool? Let's sit with our client and think about one specific role in his organization. Let's let it be an accountant, and let's think how this accountant will use this system in the future, what kind of functionalities, what kind of tools, what kind of content he or she may need. Of course, all the standard tools are also useful, but we can employ another one, a simpler one that will describe the project even better. We sent this project timeline, well, definitely to be a little different, but not for the difference sake. I'm allergic to art for art's sake, but on the other hand, using this education analogy, what kind of teachers do you remember? You remember those worst teachers, but you also remember those odd ones, those crazy ones, those not fitting the systems, those a bit different teachers. Unfortunately, it doesn't matter how many questions you ask or how curious you are, you always have to be prepared to be a bit misunderstood by your client. But again, just like in school, you cannot blame a student that he or she doesn't understand certain concept. It is the teacher's job to use different method, to rephrase, to repeat, do it 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times, so that the student in the end understand what he is being taught. I'm definitely sure that many of you came across situations, paradoxical situations, which for us practitioners are like scary stories, let's say, that when, for instance, presenting your client a wireframe, he or she says, well, it all looks logical, but why it's so black and white, for instance? Well, we all laugh, but isn't it our role to tell our client, to describe our client what he or she is seeing? Maybe the fact that, well, we hear that kind of comment is the result of us not describing the role of this particular tool clearly. We can use many research methods. We can come up with very important, very valuable insight on what kind of content and functionality, again, has to be used within certain website. But again, if we don't describe and tell step by step to our client how we got here, how A became B and B became C, we are risking a situation in which even a very truthful insight, knowledge about our user, for instance, is not understood by our client. The same goes for methods, tools, code, software we use every day. Well, we cannot blame our client about requiring certain really fancy thing in HTML and CSS if he or she doesn't understand HTML, CSS. Again, maybe that's our role to politely and calmly describe how it basically works. I started with TAURON, but I also wanted to share different cases with you that didn't end up as well as TAURON. Just recently, unfortunately, we had to finish a project with a Polish company that dates back to the old political system, so you can imagine different kind of people appearing on our client side. The very ambitious project that inspired us to conduct many different types of research, prepare many different types of materials to our client. Basically, after 2 months of creating all of this, we wanted to present the results to our client. We were just perfectly sure that, well, this is it. This is the thing that's gonna make them go along, let's say, our line of thought. After 2 hours of presentation, the client just sat silently. She just couldn't understand the link between the ethnographic study we conducted with the interviews we conducted, how those influenced how, for instance, the wireframe looks like, how workshop with clients resulted in how graphic design looks like. She couldn't, well, make the dots connect. We generated many different sources of information, many different objects, which resulted in some kind of Babel tower, which made it completely impossible to finish the whole endeavor, even though we had the best intentions in our heads. When preparing to be misunderstood, and as I said, well, this happens all the time, don't stop asking questions. Again, using the education analogy, I think if I would ask you who was the best teacher in known history, I suppose some of you would say Socrates. And yeah, I agree, Socrates was a great teacher, not only because of his knowledge of human mind or human nature, but because of the method he used. He never ever said to somebody in ancient Athens, politics works like this, human mind works like that. He was always trying to pose questions that would lead the person he was talking to certain conclusions. It works exactly the same in our everyday job. We don't make client understand us. We don't just pose certain facts upon him. We try by asking constant stream of questions, why, so that the client will get to our understanding by himself. This is how we learn, well, teach both our client and again learn ourselves how this client works, how he understands what we are doing. On the other hand, well, let's step down from our pedestal and allow our client to pose questions, even the simplest one, even the most banal questions that we would never ever imagine that could appear in a chat with us UX practitioners. Try to reaffirm that your client understands you the way you expect him to understand. Allow certain space around your work, around what you do, for certain things that can be questioned by your client. And then thirdly, when looking at any type of UX research, show a direct link between what you got to know from research, asking users, interviewing users, or observing users, with the thing that you are designing, be it a website, a service, whatever else. Without showing this clear link, the research effort is lost, and then the design deliverable, the object that is finished in the end, is also not the perfect one we would like to expect. Again, I'm not a blind fan of simplicity for simplicity's sake, but I like simplicity when it comes to digging into very complex issues, very complex questions and problems. The thing is, which I observe quite often, that as UX practitioners, we are correctly expected to know all the rules, all the methods, all the procedures and protocols, to be very professional, for instance, UX researcher with a proper baggage of knowledge and experience. While in the end, if we dig into our own knowledge and experiences, why we became UX researcher, is the fact that we do just two things. We look, we observe, and we listen. We hear what people are saying or doing. These two things, connected with curiosity again, are the purest research toolbox. Without any eye tracking, without click tracking, without statistics, etc., you can achieve fantastic results. Just curiously listening and observing what your user, what your client is doing. Last year, I was describing exactly this phenomenon when working with TAURON, when we encouraged TAURON to do research with standard employee, not with steering committees, not with managers, but people just working at TAURON. Back then, I described and showed you, for instance, this example of several hundred shortcuts on people's desktops, shortcuts to documents, websites, etc. We use this method, we use this thinking again. We are working with a European institution which is designing an intranet for itself. We were asked to conduct certain research actions so that their research design efforts can be better, can be fueled by our knowledge. Again, just by going to every people's desk, looking around, we discovered some minor things that in the end appear to be major functionalities of the whole intranet. Every second employee of this organization had a piece of paper, A4 piece of paper or two, next to his desk, glued to his screen or hanging from his lap, a list of abbreviations used in this organization. People who work there even 5, 6, or 7 years were saying that they are really ashamed that they cannot remember what GASF2 stands for. You can work there really, really long, and I suppose that's a specific type of environment in which it's really hard to learn. A very simple thing that resulted in a very major and important element of the internet we are designing. Very similarly, we discovered a post-it note, something like this. As you can imagine, an European institution which employs every single nationality of Europe, which uses several different keyboard settings and several different keyboard symbols that are specific to different languages, were simply difficult to use. If I, as a Polish person, was to work there, I would use standard Polish setting, Polish programmer setting. But if I was to write an email to my Swedish counterpart, Swedish friend, whose name is, for instance, OK, with this O here, well, I would have to change the setting or try to copy this letter from the internet. Internet is blocked in this particular institution, so a very simple thing of writing somebody's surname or name can become a hassle. Again, a simple solution, why won't we supply them with some kind of virtual keyboard? Again, a very simple method of discovering a very important thing in the end. Never ever underestimate those simple methods, which, especially when working with those huge organizations, which often underestimate what people down there in the organization chart do, they bring most valuable information. Try to approach those people actually working. The thing working with huge organizations is that we communicate mostly with the decision makers, managers, project managers, product owners, etc. We don't really communicate with people, let's say, actually working within this organization. And looking at those people, their desks, desktops, rules, documents they use, these again bring us a very important knowledge, detailed but still knowledge that can in the end be turned into a very major functionality or content of the internet. Of course, never ever underestimate those decision makers that you cooperate with. It's not that you are just looking at people working and you just disregard all the decision makers. Always have this bigger picture in mind, but try to implement those small observations you take into the bigger picture. And lastly, something that I suppose may be or is to some extent controversial, because by teaming up and educating our client, to some extent we shed some of our knowledge, tools and experience to people who are not actually researchers, designers, content strategists, etc. Anyhow, I suppose, and I think that some of you may agree with me on this fact, that we ourselves to some extent created a very deity-like image of a UX practitioner. If I'm a designer, if I'm a researcher, if I'm a developer, strategist, etc., I'm a godlike creature in comparison to my co-workers in this huge organization. Of course, we have to agree that our knowledge, our experience is different, but it doesn't mean that it makes us some kind of higher entity when cooperating with a huge organization. It's no shame, and there's nothing wrong with giving those people the basic tools we use every day. It's nothing wrong in asking a group of 20 accountants at TAURON or at this European institution to take a piece of paper and sketch their perfect intranet. Of course, it doesn't mean that me, myself, as a designer, won't design anything, that I will just merge those propositions, those offers. But again, visualizing the thoughts of those people gives me an important insight on how they see their intranet. I see this tool through their own eyes, even though they are not designers, yes, but still this gives me an opportunity to look at certain problems that I could have discovered before through their own eyes. So again, first of all, engage your client. Don't do things in isolation. Both when it comes to research, why not show your clients some research sessions? let him see a usability test or participate in an interview. Then when designing, give your client tool to his hand. Why not try to let him design, draw, come up with an idea by himself? Don't look at your client as just somebody who ordered a certain service from you. Yes, TAURON or this European institution asked me to do certain things, to offer certain services, but my client is also my user or my stakeholder. He's not just a person who will just sign off certain things in the end. He or she also has to be highly engaged into the project. And lastly, well, let's be humble for a second, or maybe 2 or maybe 10. Let's admit that us as UX practitioners, as teachers, we also learn. It's not that we enter every single project with our knowledge and skills at 120%. We also have to learn, we have to admit that we do not know certain things at many points during any kind of project we undertake. So basically, well, it's back to school. I highly encourage you to, well, talk about it, discuss it, well, think about it yourself. How can we become better teachers? How can we not only create and deliver designs, ideas, products and services, but also how to teach our clients how to think more about our work according to our UX mindset, how we can become better or even great UX teachers, not just researchers or designers. Thank you, and don't forget about your homework.
And what did you guys do with these abbreviations? Like, what was the end solution to this problem?
Well, the simplest thing we could come up with was a simple searchable list, but also to educate, remind the employees of this institution, we also came up with sort of a widget that appears within the dashboard of the intranet, which changes according to the project you are working on. Depending on what kind of project you're working on, certain types of abbreviations are being stored within the widget, and they are being displayed with proper full version of the abbreviation or sometimes term. So that's the second thing, and not being totally satisfied with it, we are thinking about even something more, but still thinking.
Thank you very much. There's a question. Mr. Gotówka, would you please the mic? Thank you very much.
Okay, hi. I really enjoyed your presentation. I have a question about your first arguments when you want to teach your client about the method and how we want to reach the goal of doing thing. And client said, but okay, but I'm not interested in learning right now, in being taught, just do the thing. So what are your first arguments to say why it's good? Thank you.
Well, honestly, I never encountered a situation in which me or somebody else from my team wanted to, well, honestly share a certain knowledge or skill that would enable the client to do certain things by himself. I suppose that it works a bit in terms of, well, me as a client, I'm going to get some knowledge that in the future will allow me to do the things I'm paying those guys for, which in the end isn't true, because as we talked here, it's not about giving the 100% of your skill set, just giving you not the tool, not the skill, but the type of thinking about things that you as a designer produce. And again, well, I suppose if I would hear something like you just said, well, I would, according to what I said previously, try to question, well, why? Why do you think that if we start immediately with what you want, we will get to the best conclusions, best results? Well, because I think that it's what we ordered is enough in this time frame. Why do you think so? What is possible in this wireframe? How did you define this what that is possible? So I suppose, again, by questioning certain ideas or assumptions, we can get to proper result.
So sometimes the argument of client is because I want to show something new to other guys that are interested in. So that's why we really need a quick product, and afterwards maybe we can make this whole process of interpreting. So how you would behave like this?
For instance, if we are talking about some very early concept of some app or website or even intranet, what I personally do is, well, we designed certain numbers of screen or flows. We go to the client, we meet with him, well, or we do not meet with him physically. We try to give him the wireframe without really explaining what he or she is seeing. And by exploring the thing, by, well, clicking, inputting certain data, etc., first of all, we are doing a usability test. On the other hand, the client is learning the thing by himself, so that he gets knowledge that we try to pass through a wireframe. I think the worst thing that is happening quite often when cooperating with a huge organization like this is that you send some wireframe, graphic design, or piece of code, and then you wait 3 days for them to write back and say no. Without them actually were working with it, when you as a creator help him or she or her explore this, well, the results are often like this. No. Let's go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.